So people ask me, what do you do for a living? I didn't know if you noticed, but rare diseases are rare, but they're not really. We'll talk about that in a minute. And when I tried to explain to my family what I do, I got down to this. I'm a bandage doctor. Now, I don't know if any of you remember that when babies are born, they go home with a bandage on their foot. That bandage is evidence that they got something called the newborn screen. Now, newborn screen is this amazing program and plan that was developed in the United States to test for, get this, less than 1% of the rare diseases that exist. That less than 1% were chosen because we can find it in a baby and we can treat it in a baby and improve outcomes in that baby. So that's why I am incredibly proud to call myself the doctor behind the bandage. Because every mom and every family remembers trying to get the bandage off their baby's foot when they get home. And that's how I describe what I do. I do important things that not everyone knows about, but affects everyone. We know that about 10% of individuals in the United States have a rare disease. They might not know they have it. They might not know why they have the symptoms they have, but that was the most recent estimate that came out of the National Organization for Rare Disorders. So we know rare isn't that rare. It's actually a lot more common. So what does that mean for me as a physician, as an educator, and for someone who says, who's going to come behind me to be the next generation of bandage doctors and bandage care providers? So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about what does our workforce look like? Who's going to be the next generation to tell families how to get the bandage off their baby's foot? Because that's really what's most important to them at that moment. But a few days later, what's most important is having someone who knows rare disease to make that phone call to say, we need to talk. So let's talk again about that newborn screen and why it's so important that we find every child with a rare disease. When we started newborn screening, we had this crazy goal in rare disease medicine to find every baby every time. And our crazy goal was maybe for one moment in time, life could be fair, no matter where you were born, who your parents were, how much money your family made, what part of the world you were from. If you were born in the United States, you had equal setting, equal footing, equal chance. And I'm still so proud that in newborn screening, for that 30 seconds of time when that little heel is being pricked and the blood drops onto the card, I pray and I hope that life is fair for all those babies. Because we know in my area, I work here in Washington, D.C., close to where we're filming today, and I know if you live in rural Maryland or if you live in inner city D.C., you get a great chance to know if you have one of those less than 1% of rare diseases that are treatable. And when we think about that, we know that by finding those diseases early, we can treat better and we can treat more effectively. What do rare diseases actually mean to us in society? Well, there was a great article that came out of Every Life that the economic burden of rare disease is about $1 trillion per year. 1 trillion. Now, we know that this isn't all in medications, and it's not all in coming to the hospital. It's a huge component of how does rare disease impact life. It's missing work. It's not being able to use routine childcare. It's having to take days off from work to take your child to childcare. Or if you're a rare disease adult, have your own medical care that occurs. All of those components are affecting us economically as well. So when we think about how do I provide next generation care for families with rare disease, you could just think I'm talking about doctors. And I am for myself. I'm trying to clone myself. No one will let me. It's not allowed. FDA won't let me clone myself. So I do lots of education projects. But we need more than just doctors. We need more than just nurses. We need society that recognizes rare disease and says, how can we step in here and help everyone with a rare disease. So when we think about how can we approach this, the National Organization for Rare Disorders has started what's called Centers of Excellence. I'm very privileged to work at one of the first Centers of Excellence and to have written the proposal for our Center of Excellence. Most recently, there was an announcement that there are 40 of these Centers of Excellence across the United States. And you can see that they're spread from east to west, well, kind of not very much in the middle because that's what happens in the United States. There's a lot of healthcare access issues in lower representation states. And when we look at where you can get rare disease care, it interestingly matches very well with where you can find a geneticist. So, in rare disease, how many do we need? And do we need that geneticist? Do we need a rare disease doctor? What kind of care do we need? Well, I love England. So England said, we think that we need 3 diagnostic geneticists for every 1 million people. I love when they published this. They didn't tell us how they came up with the number, but that's what they said they needed. So I said, well, that seems like a good baseline. In the United States, we currently have about 1.9 diagnostic geneticists who also do all the treatments per 1 million. So for sure we're behind what England thinks they need just for diagnosis. And in the US, we diagnose and treat. So we know there's not enough geneticists to provide for all of this care. Marshall, next slide. And when we look at where are the geneticists, this is where they're all distributed. It's very similar to the North Centers of Excellence. We have them on the East Coast, we have a few on the West Coast, and a few scattered across the country. And when we look at who are these geneticists and where are they working, well, guess what? 36% of them have been geneticists for 21 years or more. Now, just think about yourselves. When you get an MD, you do a residency, and then you work for 21 years, and you want to take a stab at how old you are. You're in your 60s at that point. And we know that the average age of respondents to this survey were greater than 50 years of age. So we know that there are issues with retirement coming very soon for this population. We're not going to say other things, just retirement. So next slide. Then we said, well, where are the open positions? So these are the current vacancies. So these are open positions across the United States. Now you might notice that the size of the circles are very similar to the first slide. That means for every current geneticist in the country, there's almost a need for another geneticist across the country. Now you might say, but Deb, rare disease is bigger than genetics. You said that to us when we started. And I will agree that that is the truth. But what you can see is rare disease can't just be in the hand of genetics. So then let's ask the question, well, what if we depend on genetic counselors? Now these are master's level people that are trained to really think about the genetic diagnostic odyssey, thinking about test results and how to give those results back in an effective way. So if we look at that data, we can see that their numbers are growing exponentially. Just go to the next slide and then we'll swap them around. So we can see that when we first started in 1962, there were only a few hundred genetic counselors. But most recently, the reports came out that there's almost 6,000 genetic counselors. Now when we think about the total number of geneticists, go back a slide, we can see that each year we graduate about 176 geneticists, but we're graduating about 3 times that in genetic counselors. So maybe what we really need to be thinking about is how do we strategically think about our workforce? How do we think about who's the right person to do the job for that patient and that family? So we can think about genetic counselors, we can think about geneticists. And now I want to bring up another little piece. Maybe that's not enough. I don't know if you guys remember, but for every one geneticist, we need another one. For every genetic counselor, estimates are that we probably need another half a genetic counselor. So we need thousands of people, but that only gets at the diagnosis for rare disease. Remember back, I said there was $1 trillion in expenditures for rare disease patients and families in the US. There's a huge need to think about how do we better care to reduce that total amount of cost and that burden on patients and families. So when I think about these people surrounding patients and families, maybe there's one geneticist, maybe there's one genetic counselor, maybe there's one primary care provider, but there's a lot more than 3 people that need to understand and care for rare disease patients. There could be nurses, there could be case managers, there can be specialists in the education system. There can be physical therapists. There could be engineers that are finding new ways to create equipment that they need. There could be people engineering new drugs to give them a better quality of life. Recently, there was a change in how we give a medication for a rare disease called Fabry disease. Instead of having to do infusions every 2 weeks that take hours and hours through an IV that has to be placed by a professional, now there's a medication that can be taken orally as a pill. Let's just think for a minute. If I want to reduce the cost from $1 trillion to some other number, what happens if I can have a new medication that goes from an IV therapy to an oral therapy? That's the kind of things we need to think about. How do we leverage what we do well so that we can create the workforce to make rare disease less impactful on patients and families? Now, the other thing that we're doing in education is we know that every primary care provider in the U.S. is caring for families with rare disease. We also know that they don't always know they're caring for families with a rare disease. So we are proactively asking the question, how do we get them the information they need when they need it? I don't know about all of you, but I hate learning about things when I don't care. I think we've all been there. Maybe it's, oh, I don't know, maybe one time I got a speeding ticket and I had to go to traffic school. I didn't care, but I sat in traffic school for 4 hours because I didn't want points in my license. And I'm probably not the only person listening to this right now that had that experience. But I learned what I needed to know, and I think I deleted it shortly after. But I haven't gotten a speeding ticket since, so maybe I did learn. I don't know. But this idea of how do we make sure that people have the information they need when it's useful and meaningful? That's why we're trying to create online resources. When we ask physicians, how do you find information when you don't know the answer? Do you know what the leading thing they do is? Google. Yes, the answer is Google. So we needed to get on Google, and that's what we've done. We created a series of short videos that are anywhere from 2 to 7 minutes on important rare disease topics. And then we said, we thought these were going to be for patients and families, but all the doctors are watching them. Because I don't know about all of you, but at the end of a long day when I'm tired, I'm not looking for the hour-long video. I'm looking for the 3-minute synopsis. And maybe even better if I can listen to it while I go for a walk and get some wellness for myself. So that's what we've done. We've created these short videos, which we thought were for patients and families, but have actually become a great resource for physicians, care providers, the nurses, the educators, all of the people that surround these rare disease families. And then we said, caring for rare disease families is actually pretty stressful for care providers. Now, physicians, nurses, healthcare providers are type A people. That's why they do the job, and that's why you want them doing the job. These are, let's be honest, perfectionists. So imagine being told, I want you to care for a patient that we only have a 50% chance of finding a diagnosis. We don't know what you should do for them, and we don't know if it'll work. And then ask type A people to do that. It's a little stressful. Fair? So what we did is we created a 4-hour CME series. It's because CME is how we bribe physicians because they need a certain number of CME hours. And we said, what if we create 3 hours of content, and in the last hour, we actually stop and say, you're doing a good job, even if you don't feel like you're the perfect doctor. Because we hear all the time from patients and families, I don't need a perfect doctor, I don't need a perfect teacher, I don't need a perfect nurse, I don't need a perfect care provider. I need someone who will keep showing up. So when I think about what we need to do to really have an effective next generation of rare disease providers, we want people that love what they do. We want people that love thinking about rare disease. All the different ways all of us in the community impact rare disease and impact that need for rare disease patients and families. But we know we don't have to be perfect. We know we have to be patient with ourselves and with each other. And we know the number one thing we need to do is to show up every day and remind families they're not alone.